Hi everybody and welcome to the third video covering the Anti Sicilians against my Taimanov repertoire. In this video we're going to be covering the third move b3, which is quite an interesting move and has been seen occasionally on pretty high level games, especially when it comes to rapid and blitz games. The idea of 3b3 is quite simple compared to the move d6, which is of course the most played move instead of e6 in the Sicilian. Black doesn't have as much influence on the dark squares for now. Think for example about playing b3 against d6. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense, as black can already think about playing e5 when the potential of the bishop of having the bishop on b2 is really just very small, as it's looking at a pawn on e5 that is well defended. However, against e6 it makes quite a bit of sense, as black shouldn't be wasting a lot of time trying to set up the same pawn structure. So d6 is also not the move that I'm going to suggest here. Instead, it has turned out that the move b6 is actually quite a good reply against b3. So that's already something a little bit more original, both sides deciding to do a queenside fianchetto. Normally white continues with bishop b2 here, although he does have two other options. The first one is d4, trying to steer the game back into some sort of open Sicilian. However, this doesn't turn out too well for white. After c takes d4, knight takes d4, bishop b7, white should now probably consider to play bishop d3. Of course, knight c3 doesn't make a whole lot of sense, as it runs into a direct pin with bishop b4. So bishop d3 is the logical move, but here bishop c5 is a strong move that is quite annoying for white to face. The main idea being that after bishop b2, queen f6 is now coming, and white is having some trouble defending both the d and the e pawn. He would preferably play something like bishop e2 in order to defend this knight in a normal way, but he can't, so he would have to play c3, which is quite an ugly move, and after knight c6 black is simply a tiny bit better, as the bishop on b2 is really misplaced. So d4 is not a very strong move, and it's not something that I expect a good player to play here. c4 is another idea, but also not too dangerous. Once again, c4 is the move that always means white's playing for a Maroczy structure in the future. So once again, as we saw in one of the previous videos, white wants to eventually play d4 and get that Maroczy structure, which comes along with the space advantage and a few good things. However, we don't allow that here as black. We play bishop b7, knight c3, knight f6, immediately targeting the e-pawn, and obviously white doesn't want to defend that with queen c2, after which knight c6 followed by knight d4, knight b4 would give us a good initiative. So here the move bishop d3 or e5 is possible. After bishop d3, knight c6, bishop b2, I like the move queen b8. The queen is quite well placed here for now. You could put it on c7, but that would fall under some knight b5 moves, so b8 is a little bit more safe. And after something like queen e2, bishop d6, black has very decent play, as he's planning to play the knight to e5. Instead, the move e5 here has been seen and played. It's a bit better than the other two options. After knight e4, exchanging those knights, for example, knight takes e4, knight takes e4, bishop e2, knight c6 is possible. And already here I think black is doing pretty well, as he's planning to play d6 and probably take back with the queen or maybe with the bishop. One line I have is, for example, bishop b2, d5, or d6 would also be an option, but here d5, ed, queen takes. And actually black can probably consider giving this pawn, for example, after short castle, bishop e7, bishop takes g7, rook g8. The bishop could come back to c3 or something like that, but black actually enjoys full compensation after a long castles, when he has all sorts of attacking ideas here and also very strong pressure over the d-file. That's about it for knight e4. One last move that white has here. No, sorry, that's about it for knight e4. Bishop b2 is really the move that is critical in these lines, and I'm happy to say that I found another game of Mr. Potkin that we can follow here, who really seems to be an expert in these Anti Sicilians as well. So I'm glad to follow him at all times. when it comes to Taimanov. Bishop b7, queen e2 is White's main idea. He's planning to play knight c3 and long castle, and then maybe follow up with d4 later, leading to some unorthodox open Sicilian type of position. After knight c6, knight c3, a6 is the new move that Potkin introduced only like a month ago or so. But it's a very strong idea that I've checked a little bit, and I was checking it right after it was played because I was having some difficulties with this line, although of course objectively speaking black should be fine here. One of the main ideas of the move is that you're going to play b5 as soon as White goes long castle, and really the idea of playing g3 is not that scary. For example, if White decides that long castle b5 is not something he wants to get into because it looks dangerous, after g3 bishop e7 seems to me like a good move, as bishop g2 can be answered with bishop f6, challenging this bishop on b2, and White can't play e5 because knight takes e5 would be played and losing a pawn. Castle would be a move here, but then I go d6 and White can no longer play e5 or do anything like d4, and we see once again a familiar situation where White hasn't played d4 very quickly in the opening, and he's now struggling to even get a piece on one of those dark squares. Typical scenario in all these anti-Sicilian lines. So a6 long castle is the most ambitious way for White to play, and the only one that's a little bit dangerous. After b5, White has two options. King b1 has been played against Potkin and is probably the most logical move. d4 here doesn't make some sense, but it doesn't give White any advantage whatsoever. After rook c8 here, Black can follow up with moves such as queen a5 and bishop c5, and he probably will develop some sort of initiative on the queen side before White can do anything particularly dangerous. White's still having some difficulty developing the remaining pieces on the king side. So king b1 is the move that I looked at mostly, but after rook c8, a normal move which prepares knight d4 partially, queen e3, if g3 then knight d4 gives Black a very comfortable game. If queen e3, knight f6 has been played here by Potkin, and after e5, knight g4, queen e1, queen c7. Turned out that this pawn on e5 was bound to be more or less lost, and White went for h3, knight takes e5, knight takes e5, knight takes e5, or sorry, queen takes e5. White did manage to win this pawn back by the following sequence of moves: knight takes b5, and now the knight on e5 is hanging anyway. But in the game, Potkin showed that the following pawn structure is really quite good for Black, who has all these central pawns that eventually he managed to push forward, and also he managed to put pressure on this a file, which is something that Black can think about in the future. This is the game Antipov against Potkin in Moscow 2015. So that's the key game when it comes to this b3 line. That's really all I have to say about b3. It's a tricky move. It's even something I have advised to some of my friends who are not that theoretical in the past, but it really shouldn't cause any major problems to Black, and I really like the way Potkin approached this line in his last game. So have a look at that game, have a look at the lines I have in the ebook, and you should be once again totally fine. Thanks for watching. Next time will already be the last video covering the Anti-Sicilians. I hope you liked the videos, and I'll see you in the next video.